Yeah, my background is I've been with DAF now for about 9 years. Before that I was in private industry. Right, phosphorus and potassium. That's where most of my work since I've been with the department has been in. Where this deep placement argument comes in is that when the crop residues are returned to the soil surface and we put starter fertiliser, we're enriching about that much of the topsoil. Plant roots can't work in that part of the topsoil unless it's wet. So it's not wet for enough time during the growing season for us to make use of that really enriched layer of nutrition. So if we put it in about 15 centimetres, that's the depth at which evaporative loss stops. And so for the soil to dry out, a plant root is going to be the thing doing the drying out. The theory behind the deep placement is that putting the nutrient into a part of the soil where the crop can actually have an opportunity to get hold of it. So on page 2 and page 3 of the handout sheet, there's just some trial results there. So on page 2, I've got results from a potassium trial. It's up at Chelmsford. Fairly typical of a lot of upland vertisols, we're seeing this potassium stratification. So it's all right in the very top, and once you get under that, the crop's struggling to get enough. So this particular experiment, we've had 3 crops there. So we had wheat in 2014, which is the brown bars. He double cropped it to sorghum, which is the orange, and then he's short fallowed back to sorghum again in 15-16. So the top graph is what the grain yields were. The middle graph is the difference in grain yield between what we applied and what we started with. Most of my work has been with phosphorus. So on Wednesday, as part of the Conservation Farmers Tour, you're going to speak to a grower there, John Alexander, and he's one of the cooperators I've had one of these long-term deep placement experiments on. You see from the soil test results, we've got the similar story there. So Caldwell P is an indicator of what phosphorus is available for the plant to take up here and now. The BSESP is like the reserve phosphorus. So what's the phosphorus that can come off the bench to resupply Caldwell? So in the surface, we're looking pretty good. 37 for Caldwell and 98 for BSES says, yep, that's all going okay there. So barley in 2014, which was the first year we had the trials there. So you can see the P treatments are 0, 10, 20, 30, 60 a P. And there's another one there on the left-hand side called FR. That's untreated control. So that is just what growers such as yourselves produce with your current practice in that site where I've put my experiments around it. So that's grower management level, and that lets me quantify, well, what actually is the production starting point. So you can see in the first year at Jimbour West there, we've got a bit of a kick just from the 0 treatments. So there's a combination of tillage, some nitrogen and some sulphur and some zinc. And then after that, that's when we can start to see what the effect of the phosphorus application is. So it is going the right way. Responses in central Queensland tend to be more consistent and more dramatic. The economics on the outcomes up there are that the deep placement work for P and K is at least you're getting your money back in your first year, and if not the first year, the second year. As we come further south, the chickpea response tends to get more variable. Most consistent crops we have responding to the deep placement are grass crops, so wheat, barley, sorghum. Generally they're the ones we have most reliability from.
Righto, fellas, well, I'm sorry to cut things short, but can I just ask you to put your hands together to thank David for presenting to us?
So it was a part of a BMRG project to look at trying to improve something on a farm that is, going to be useful for each individual farmer. So it wasn't a blanket approach. We had a group of farmers and said, well, what is something on your farm that we can do relatively easily to improve the situation? And this farm is owned by Peter Howlett. And the problem that Peter had was strip tillage. So the tillage, was working really well for the summer crops when it was planted back into his 36-inch rows. Whenever he tried to go out of that, such as, for winter crops such as his wheat or barley, whatever, or even the mung beans and navy beans, we'd end up with the wave action. So that was the issue. Is it either moisture, nutrients, or just the soil, getting compacted or smeared because it's just following in the same path each time? So we had this sort of 8-inch zone that continually gets cultivated, and so the nutrients get put in there, it gets cultivated, so it's going to hold more moisture, the sides are going to become hard, and so we're thinking, is it just a limitation for the roots just obviously staying in there and not wanting to go out? So they were the sort of the 3 parameters that we started with, trying to isolate, which one's causing the major damage. On the front page there, the second slide is just a bit of a layout of how we, or how I sort of addressed the situation where we're going to sample for the soil to start with. And so you see the 2 rows, and each number there dictates a different point where we sampled. And I did that for different reasons, to see what the nutrition was like in the row, what it was like sort of 8 inches to the side, outside where the cultivation was. And I also took a sample on Peter's farm where nothing's been done before, to get a baseline data for the soils of this region, to find out just what is the P levels in these soils, because they're supposed to be high fixing P soils, etc., etc. The potassium, for instance, as an example, in point A, which is directly in the line in the plant row there, for potassium was 149. That's available milligrams per kilogram of potassium. That's available potassium. C, when I dug the trench across, was 198, so close to 200. E, which was in the middle here, was 268, but D, sort of the natural non-farming areas, was close to 900. So it just goes to show, after whatever the number of years here Peter's been working this farm, how much the K levels have dropped in that situation. And there's obviously, by the time we're getting to here, so we're getting a pretty handle on the situation. Wasn't nutrients, the situation is just pure compaction. So once we started to do an extra cultivation, things like this, it was quite surprising to Peter what the differences in the yields were. So in our standard, which is just the control straight down the middle, which we had, say, 100% of our yield, whenever we had a strip to the side, we improved the yield by about sort of 10%, and where we cultivated to this side and this side, we improved the yield by about 26%. So, it was having serious impact, not only just on the winter crops that Peter was growing in rotation to the peanuts, but as well as also reducing the ability of the actual peanuts to be coming out of the ground, because they were getting stuck in this hard compacted soil. So what did we do as a means to try and alleviate the situation? We ran more machinery over at the top of it. But this way we're a bit more selective, and we used rippers to go down and just to try and open up that soil. So, that has worked a lot better, and Peter now incorporates it into part of his management now, prior to every peanut crop, to give it a ripping like this to loosen up the soil.
One of the biggest problems with these soils here is they're like plasticine. When they get wet, they compact and they squeeze out and they go everywhere. And compaction in the old days was our biggest problem. And it was the wheel tractor, but it was also the blade ploughs and the chisel ploughs, and things smeared it all. We'd end up with a nice fluffy layer on top and a brick literally the size of a house brick underneath. And we put tractors on single wheels, but we were still wandering around a bit. And then we got a fella in with a backpack GPS of some sort, and he taped it to the dash. I remember it had a little arrow on about this long, and he drove for days with a ripper on this thing on 27 metre centres and put in our first GPS lines, if you like. So what we did then is we planted down that ripper line with the markers out, and then went back and filled the gaps in. And when we planted wheat or barley, you know, we'd shift the tine from, like the old Girals, you know, they had a 9-inch gap, didn't they, and a cultivating tine in the middle, where you just took that boot and put it there, and that gave you a wider track, and that was your tram line, you know. And then Bob's your uncle, the paddock was permanently marked. Still run a metric system, but we're on 120-inch tracks, which doesn't sound much, but it's a lot if you got a reasonable deep track and you got a 3-metre machine fighting a 120-inch machine. That's why that thing's on fat tyres. On the standard tyres, it was leaving a horrendous track, and what happens here is that you get compaction down, but you get lateral compaction as well, and you end up with a shoulder on the edge of your track.
Some of them now got the 2 lines and they got the nozzle in front. They might have a 2 in front and a 4 behind. So you go slow, it's using the 2, and they had a trial, and when you get really fast, both click on.
Yeah, and then they both came on. Yeah. But what we've worked out over the years, and when we used to career around 35 k's an hour, you know, we've sort of grown up a bit, and now we're sort of 22 to max of 25.
So I told you you'd do.
We used to have a Goldacres originally, and I remember, and it'd spray at 40 k an hour. And I remember getting out and standing on the step and looking behind me in a wheat crop one time, and the thing was just like a whirlwind had gone over it behind the machine. And we were trying to work out why we were getting indifferent results. And that. There's wheel shields for this boom in here if anybody's interested. And they're on an airbag, so you can just lift them up out of the road when you're not using them. Yeah, they stand up about that high off the ground. So, and you just hit a button at the end of the row and suck them up. So there's different breeds of these things around, but this is the simplest version we came up with. And these 3 belts just run all the time. They got 1 hydraulic motor on them and 1 ram to tilt this whole thing up. And the header driver can still see over the top of the belt, and the tractor driver can just dial in the speed of the belt as the different grains throw different places so that it throws to the middle. But the other big thing with this bin is these tyres. And I'm a bit slow, but you know, I've seen them in Europe heaps of times. They're a high-speed agricultural transport tyre. That's exactly what they're built for. And the Europeans do everything with tractors and trailers, but the beauty of them is that they're a flat tread, and when this bin turns, you know, they just roll on the walls. There's no berming up, you know, an agricultural tyre on your call-out bins and things, you know. And I don't know what this paradigm is with putting tractor tyres on everything. Why don't we go to a truck-type tyre, you know? And that's exactly what that is.
All right, good. So my name's Alison McCarthy. I'm a research engineer at the NCEA here, and my work is on automating irrigation and also the decision support systems or decision support tools that can help you make decisions about how to vary the irrigation. So we've been doing some trials with this. So at the moment we've got a trial for cotton in John Darien using the commercial variable rate hardware. I've been also developing some image analysis systems, and we're able to extract the flowering date and also the daily height for each plot.
Alright, I'm Cheryl McCarthy. I'm a research fellow here at the National Centre for Engineering and Agriculture. The work that I do is in machine vision systems. So I have a current project funded by the Queensland Government for using UAVs to do automated crop scouting operations, where we have cameras mounted on the UAVs that can automatically detect what's happening in the field. They fly back and forth over a field. The images all get uploaded onto a computer or the cloud, and they're all processed and you get a mosaic. So what we have here is a mosaic. So there's 25 hectare area, and analysing the area as it's going through and identifying where weeds are. So the green areas are weeds, and drawing little red boxes around where it's picked weeds up.
My area of work goes across mainly
crop nutrition, mechanization, and greenhouse gas emissions. Now, nitrous oxide emissions are important because it's a quite powerful greenhouse gas. Looking at ways of improving nitrogen efficiency to impose limits to nitrogen inputs on the farm that might compromise yield. An important part of our work is looking at different fertilizer formulations in order to identify the efficiency of formulation that have, for example, nitrification inhibitors or coated materials, coated urea that can slow down the release of nitrogen into the soil and provide more opportunities for the crop to use that nitrogen. However, the cost of the fertilizer doesn't quite justify its use at the moment. There's also a relationship between the nitrogen input is related to the rate of nitrogen application and obviously the soil conditions, mainly water and carbon content. This is the model that is being suggested based on several years of research. We've seen benefits in terms of emission reduction from DMPP or NTEC urea.
I've been here for 3.5 years now, so my background and interest, I suppose, is not so much in the gaseous emissions, but what either runs off or drains through the soil, and nitrate's a slippery chemical in terms of it will drain through the soil if it gets the opportunity with enough water around. So we've got a project looking at the mineralisation of nitrogen that's occurring in the soil after key irrigation events during key growth stages of the cotton crop. Now, plants will readily use nitrate, they will readily use ammonium, but they'll also get access to some of that organic nitrogen, and particularly the stuff that's in the dissolved forms. These are simply tubes, as you can see, in the ground, but when the crop was planted, and it's designed to keep the roots out. So it's a root exclusion tube. What we want to measure is the soil that's inside there. So we're measuring the effect of the microbial activity and the irrigation and the fertiliser only. So we're a bit short on results so far because we're in the thick of doing all the analyses. This is not the technical part for us is when we come back here with the soil sample and then we're in the lab. So we're trying to look at also different soil tests to find out how much of that organic nitrogen might be readily labile, we call it, or readily used by the microbes and therefore converted into forms that the plant might use as well.
I just wanted to thank you very much for having me along today. I'm the founder of Swarm Farm Robotics, and particularly like to thank Jill and Jono for hosting us here. You know, you look at the big sprays, you look at the big tractors, there's no way you drive one of those through your front lawn, through your garden. It'd absolutely destroy the place. And yet, we drive these massive machines across our paddock every day of the week saying we're doing the right thing, we're at best practice, this is awesome, and we've got controlled traffic, it's all okay. We didn't actually get rid of the compaction, we just controlled it to those wheel tracks, but the compaction's still there. And while we keep making things bigger and more complicated and heavier and more expensive, the more we're compromising, the harder it is to do a good job with a big machine. I suppose it comes back to the Henry Ford quote. You know, if it asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. Let's just add another 50 horsepower under the bonnet, make it 20 foot wider, and that's the model that's coming out next year. And I guess that's in stark contrast to what we're trying to do in Swarm Farm. Obviously it's very wet here. Normally you wouldn't be on this paddock after this rain. It's quite wet, as you can see. That's one of the benefits of our robots. We're trying to make things lighter and smaller and less impact on the soil. And these are some of the opportunities we have, is to be able to get on the country sooner after rain to do weed control and other agricultural things. I guess the other thing, and I mentioned earlier, was the weed resistance problem. I do remember another story. I was sort of straight out of uni. I went to a clearing sale at near Mara. We're all sitting there talking about how good zero till was and how it revolutionised what we were doing and how good it was. And I remember piping up, we're all drinking a few beers, and said, you know, what about herbicide resistance? You know, we learned about that at uni. I'll never forget, This guy just laughed and said, "Ha ha, I've never seen anything that 2 litres a hectare Roundup won't kill." And we all sat there and laughed and thought how funny it was, you know, like imagine using 2 litres a hectare Roundup. You know, it's pretty rare I put less than 2 litres of air in my tank nowadays, and you know, it's not that long ago that, you know, we were using 1.5 litre of Roundup, 1.25 litres regularly. Well, you know, we just don't do that anymore. What we're doing was going to hit the wall. We just can't keep going the way we are with zero till and hope to be sustainable and do the same thing in 5 years' time. We've got 600 litre tanks on there at the moment. We generally don't fill them that full because we don't need to. When we're spot spraying, generally we're using 1 or 2% of the chemical, so we're only turning on when there's a weed. The robots themselves can do about 64 hectares in 12 hours, or about 10 hours. You'll see even now it's quite windy, but because all our nozzles are about that high off the ground, our release height's much better, and we're going so slow you don't get as much drift and things off the nozzles. So ultimately you get more chemical on the plants, less blowing away. It's a much better way to spray. So these machines run at about 8 kilometres an hour. No one's really doing that out spraying an ag at the moment. Everyone's going at 18 k's an hour or faster. And for us it's all about, well, the slower they're going, the better job we can do. I mean, I talked about before about wind shear at the nozzle. But the thing is that the best time to spray Sunday afternoon before the rain's coming, well, they can be out there doing it.
Doing the 8 k's an hour we're doing at lower speeds. You know, we can pick up weeds that are, you know, tiny. Sometimes you think, geez, it's a false fire, but you get out and have a look and there's a tiny little weed, you know, a leaf coming through the soil. And I mean, it's pretty impressive to see that technology working at low speeds. Well, 8 k's is 2 metres per second. So if you've got a weed that's 1/2 metre long, it's on for 1/4 of a second. If you're doing double that speed or triple that speed, it's on for a lot less. So you get, you know, wind shear effects, so you might miss your target, as well as, you know, if it's on for longer, you get a better footprint on the ground, as you could imagine. We get around 6 hectares an hour per machine. We're working in a swarm of 4 at the moment. So we're doing about anywhere between 20 and 22 hectares per hour with the 4 machines. You know, we're doing 200 to 250 hectares per day at the moment. And if you can push that to 24 hours, you're starting to cover a fair bit of country with these machines. It's pretty exciting stuff.
I guess that probably really is the game changer of this technology. It's about slowing down and bringing in new farming practices. Our sorghum breeders are breeding sorghum varieties. They're breeding with the tools they have now. And you know, often you see a sorghum variety in the variety trial, looks great, goes 1 year, great yield, looks fantastic. You think, I'll look for that one next year. Next year it falls flat on the sas, dry year, lodges everywhere, and you say that one's no good, it gets chucked out of the breeding programs. Now, you know, what if we could slow down? What if we could do stuff at individual plant level? What if that variety could be thinned in a drought year so it doesn't hit the wall and doesn't fall over and doesn't lodge? And that piece of genetic material might be the next variety that gets us a 5% higher yield in a wet year and can still maintain its yield in a lower year. That sort of stuff, that genetic material is going out the door at the moment. And I'm not a sorghum breeder and I don't claim to be, but they're the sort of examples of where robots are going to make a difference in the future.